Hello and welcome into this Thursday edition of Big Ten Today. So glad to have you here. I'm Kyla Mills alongside the former NFL coach Dave Wannstedt, here to break down everything NFL draft because it is finally here. The wait is over. So many dreams are going to come true this weekend, which really is the special human part of all of this. What's that like to see those people that you know just get to experience that?
Well, it's exciting for the coaches because they get a chance to better their team. But these scouts, it's all about the scouts. I mean, this is like their Christmas. They have been studying and following these players for some of them 2, 3, 4 years. So this is a huge day for the personnel people, probably more so than the coaches.
So much work goes on behind the scenes that I feel like a lot of people don't know, and you're going to share a little bit more about that later in the show. But that is today's big story, the NFL draft coming up starting this evening with the first round. Last year, 55 Big Ten players heard their names called. A pretty big haul expected out of the conference again this season. Some of the headliners, including former Ohio State wide receiver Marvin Harrison Jr., Michigan quarterback J.J. McCarthy, Iowa star defensive back Cooper DeJean, and many more. And we're going to break all of that down right now on Big Ten Today. And for more on that, exactly on that, we welcome in NFL Films executive producer and draft analyst Greg Cosell. Great to see you. Thanks for stopping by. First, how are you? Have you gotten any sleep, or are you just full of caffeine at this point?
Sleep's overrated, Kylan. Sleep's way overrated. The Coach Wannstedt probably remembers that from when he coached. Sleep's overrated.
Okay, fair enough. You can sleep over the summer, after the draft.
Right.
All right, well, let's start with the wide receiver class. I know there's been a lot of talk about the quarterbacks, but also just so much talent there. Ohio State wide receiver Marvin Harrison Jr. with incredible numbers, really just good in a number of areas. But some people don't have him as the top, according to some reports from the scouts. Like, what's your rating at this point of where those wide receivers stack up, specifically Harrison Jr.?
Yeah, I mean, I really like Marvin Harrison. I watched him last summer from 2022. I watched him this year from 2023. I mean, to me, he's your prototypical number one receiver. You know, the way the league looks at receivers now, can a guy line up to the short side of the field, what we call the boundary X? Can he line up to the short side of the field? Can he win one-on-one? Because you're going to get a lot of one-on-one coverage to the short side of the field, and he can do that. He's got size, he's got speed, he's got hands, he's got body control. He's kind of got a deceptive explosiveness. He's so smooth and fluid that sometimes you lose sight of how explosive he really is. He's physical enough. You wouldn't say that's the number one trait that he has, but he's physical enough. I thought that he was the top receiver in the draft. Now, when I say that, there's other receivers that I think, like Malik Nabers, is right there with him. But I just really like Marvin Harrison a lot.
That's where there's been some disparity. LSU's Malik Nabers with that explosiveness, maybe overtaking Harrison Jr. I don't know, according to some eyes, depending on what you're looking for. But let's move on to the quarterbacks. Former USC quarterback Caleb Williams, maybe one of the only guarantees in this draft, going top overall to the Chicago Bears. As a Bears fan, I'm slightly invested in this. But what can folks expect with him going to the Chicago Bears?
I think that he's really gifted. The one thing that's not talked about with him, Kylan, which I think is really important, is he can control the football really well. And when I say that, I mean that he can place the ball where he wants to. And, you can do 10 things right, but if you can't throw it where you want to, you really don't have anything. And that's what he can do really, really well. I think there's so many other factors involved in his game with the movement aspect. Does he need to move? Does he not need to move? We can't get into his head. Obviously, USC did not have a good O-line. He probably felt that he had to put up 50 points every week. That's a hard way to play. But the fact is he really can control the football. I don't know him personally, so I can't speak to any of those other issues that are supposedly out there. But he's a pretty gifted guy.
Hey, Greg, this coach. The thing that jumped at me from a coach's perspective, in the last 2 years, 74 touchdowns and only 10 interceptions. I mean, that's 7-1. And someone said that he's always had one interception in the red zone total in his career. I mean, I think it's what you're alluding to there as far as him being able to place the ball, and he doesn't have a lot of interceptions.
No, and I think what stands out about that to me is he moves a lot. So there's a lot of plays that are outside of structure or above the X's and O's, is the term a lot of people use now. And when you're still able to throw with precision in that kind of environment, I think that's a real positive. But he does get sacked a lot. Some of that's obviously not on him, as we know, but it'll be interesting to see how that plays out once he gets to the league.
After Williams, a little bit of conversation as to where the rest of this quarterback class will fall. Former Michigan quarterback J.J. McCarthy, possibly a top 5 pick here. Maybe doesn't have the video game numbers and that ground and pound offense that Michigan runs, but still brings a lot to the table. What stands out when you watch his film?
Yeah, you know, Colin, I think he is your classic poster child for the projection aspect of the draft, particularly when it comes to quarterbacks, because I don't think his tape is first-round tape. And when I say that, I don't mean that he's no good and shouldn't be drafted. But I think when you look at his tape, and it has nothing to do with the number of times he throws the ball, those kinds of things don't mean much to me when I watch a player. One thing I learned, I was fortunate to know Bill Walsh well, and he always said, you isolate the traits of the quarterback. You evaluate the quarterback. And I don't think he had first-round traits. So that doesn't mean he won't get drafted there. And maybe in 3 years, we'll be talking about him as a great quarterback. But I think he's going to very much be a function of team and scheme fit, particularly early in his career.
Yeah, I think, I gave him credit, Greg. How about just the sense of, we know Jim Harbaugh is a quarterback guru. He's the whisper guy. He's the offensive coordinator behind the scenes, the head coach. And he misses 6 games. So you got a quarterback, J.J. McCarthy, that really, sure, he had assistants around him, but his main voice was not there. I think that's huge for him to be able to overcome that and sustain it through the year. I think the maturity of this kid, I think, is special.
Yeah, and some would argue, by the way, Coach, and you look, you can go back to when you were in Dallas with Troy. It's actually harder to throw the ball fewer times, believe it or not, than it is to throw it a lot. Because when you throw it a lot, you get into a rhythm. When you're not asked to throw it a lot, you really never get into a rhythm. And then when you do have to make a tough throw, that's harder to do because you're like I said, you're just not in the timing and rhythm of your game. So some would argue that it's harder to play that way than easier.
One thing I wanted to ask you, Greg, is how much of a factor is the performance at the collegiate level? You look at J.J. McCarthy's 27-1 record, the best among the top picks in this draft class. How much are scouts actually looking at that and playing that into their decision-making?
Colin, that would be individual based. It doesn't necessarily mean a lot to me. I'm not. Coach Wannstedt might have a different view. I'm not a big believer in the idea he's a winner, so that means he's going to be a great NFL quarterback. I mean, I go back, a number of years when Alabama won the national championship and Jake Coker was the quarterback, and no one said he's a winner and should be a high draft choice. So I think you have to be careful about that. I think you have to evaluate the quarterback. He played on a really good team. They had the best O-line in college football, a dominant run game, a great defense with 8 or 9 guys at the combine. This is no knock on J.J. McCarthy by any means, but I don't think that factors into your evaluation of him, in my view, anyway.
Okay, how about former Washington quarterback Michael Penix Jr., a plus arm, led his team to the national championship game. What are you looking for when you watch him?
He's a fascinating guy to watch, Kylan, because he played in an offense where they pushed the ball down the field. He was the best intermediate and vertical thrower of this top sort of 6 group of quarterbacks, and that was the nature of their offense. A lot of intermediate vertical routes. He pushed it down the field, good accuracy down the field, big arm, made a lot of outstanding throws. And the thing that's fascinating about him, given the fact that he had a lot of deeper drops, is the fact that he didn't get sacked much at all. So when you add in the fact that he had to take deeper drops, throw it down the field, and hardly ever get sacked, that says that he's seeing things pretty clearly because the ball's coming out of his hand.
Penix Jr. does have a history of some injuries, though. Another thing you have to factor in, tore his ACL twice, has had some shoulder issues. How big of a concern is that at this point?
That'll be a concern for some teams, no question. He's been clean the last couple of years. He's played every game. It hasn't been a factor. As I said, he hasn't gotten sacked a lot in college, if you view that as an important thing. But I'm sure some teams will view that as a potential issue. But fortunately, he's been clean. I've gotten a chance to talk to Penix. He's a really sharp kid, too.
All right, well, it's a big piece also to add those linemen who are going to protect your quarterback. And Penn State offensive lineman Olu Fashanu projected possibly top 10 Big Ten offensive lineman of the year, consensus All-American at the left tackle position. How do you see his game translating into the professional level?
He's a strong player, Kyle, and I mean he's one of those guys that anchors really, really well. I think he's a better pass protector than he is a run blocker at this point in his career. And let's remember, none of these guys are finished products when they come into the league. They're still college players. My only concern with him, and we'll find out, is he's a little stiff in his lower half, and now he's going to face better pass rushers than he faced in college football. So we'll see how that plays out. But there's a lot of snaps where guys tried to speed to power with him, and he just stopped them dead in their tracks. He's a strong pass protector.
Hey, Greg, I'll take the next guy here because this is kind of intriguing to me. Johnny Newton, defensive lineman out of Illinois, right? Everybody out there is talking about Byron Murphy from Texas, that he's the guy. But I'm a big production guy, and when I look at production, I'm a Johnny Newton guy. Maybe it's a scheme or just the school I come from.
Right.
What's your thought there comparing these? Because they're probably the two defensive tackles people were talking about.
Yeah, I think they're stylistically similar, Dave, too. I mean, they're three technique type guys. They're one gap guys. Which is what you're used to. They're both one gap guys. Newton can certainly rush the quarterback. He's got great quickness off the ball. He can get into the gaps. He can penetrate. I'm really curious to see him because I think he was hurt a little bit this year, and I think it did affect his play, particularly in the run game. Because I watched him last summer from 2022, and I thought he was a really, really good prospect. And I don't think he played quite as well, but I know he had an injury this year. I even think he missed a game or two, if memory serves me correctly. But he's definitely that kind of player. He's kind of the smaller, stout, three technique that can rush the quarterback. There's a lot more of those guys. Obviously, I'm not going to compare him to Aaron Donald, but it's stylistically that kind of player. They're shorter, they're stouter, but they're incredibly quick off the ball.
Well, Newton led Power 5 defensive tackles and quarterback pressures for the second straight season in 2023. He is listed as just 6'1", though 300 pounds. Yep. Just curious how you would evaluate his size.
Yeah, I don't think that's a problem, Kylan, anymore. We've seen that in the league. I mean, you can go back a number of years to someone like Geno Atkins, who played with the Cincinnati Bengals. We have guys like Grady Jarrett in the league now with the Atlanta Falcons. You can go back to the 90s and John Randall. I mean, there are smaller, shorter defensive tackles. They're gap players, and they attack in the gaps, and they're really good at it. They have tremendous quickness. So I think just like certain positions like wide receiver, even quarterback to a certain extent, I think the size is no longer a major part of the equation.
Yeah, next guy, Greg, I think the backbone of that Iowa defense, great Iowa defense this year, Cooper DeJean. He gets hurt, he comes back, he runs 4.4. I know we talked about him some on our 33rd team call once. My question is, do you see him? I know he's got the speed to play corner, and we watched all the tape together, but do you see, I kind of see him as a safety. I think a nickelback or a safety. Where are you at on Cooper? Where do you see him playing with all the guys you've watched?
Ultimately, I would say that I probably see him as a safety or a star, which is the nickel, kind of the Jalen Ramsey role that he played with the Rams. I think he can play corner depending on your scheme. I thought in press man, he struggled a bit because I thought he was a little tight hip coach when he had to turn and run. Now, he's straight line fast. There's no question about that. But I thought just in terms of his lateral quickness, his change of direction, his transition, all those things we talk about at corner play, just a little stiff. But he's straight line fast. He's an explosive athlete. I personally think he'd be more of an impact player at the safety position.
This isn't the strongest safety class necessarily either. If a team is picking up DeJean for that, where could you see him going?
That's a great question, Kyle, because, there's another safety from the Big Ten who I really like, and that's Tyler Nubin. So, I guess it depends. DeJean has not played a ton of safety in college, so you're making a transition with him. And even though he's a really smart kid and a great athlete, there's still a transition. Whereas somebody like Tyler Nubin, who's a big kid, smart kid, great instincts on the back end, great understanding of routes and reading the quarterback, and he's got really good size as well. So that's a great question. And then it comes down to the team and how they evaluate the guys. But I really like Tyler Nubin as well.
Yeah, we're going to be talking more about Newman later on in our show. Moving along to the next player, Washington wide receiver Rome Odunze. Really good ball tracking abilities, but again, this wide receiver class just loaded. But what's his upside?
Yeah, he's a contort your body control, great hands receiver. He's got some smoothness to him, fluidity to him, but I wouldn't necessarily call him explosive in the way we think of Neighbors or Harrison. But look, in this league now, the ability to make contested catches, that cannot be overstated. That's a major part of how receivers make their money in this league, particularly one-on-one. You throw the ball up to them, and that's what you want, because quarterbacks are taught if it's one-on-one on the outside, throw the ball. So he's a master at that. He may be the best in this class at that particular trait. So again, he's probably a top 10 guy. I mean, Kylan, we're looking at maybe quarterbacks and wide receivers being 7 or 8 of the first picks in the draft.
Yeah, you know, it's funny you say that, Greg, because you know who he reminds me of, and I hate to make comparisons. I was with Michael Irvin for his career at Miami and for Dallas. This guy reminds me of Michael Irvin. You know, just his size, the things you're talking about, body control, going for the ball, strong hands.
Yeah.
No, I really like him. Let me jump on here. Laiatu Latu from UCLA. You know, most people, it's kind of unanimous that everybody says he could be the best pure pass rusher in this draft. We know the history when he was at Washington and he had the injury and he couldn't play and he goes to UCLA. Where do you think, you're talking to people all throughout the league, do you think that injury situation that he had at Washington is going to be a major factor in him being a high pick, or do you think they're going to ignore that?
That'll be case by case, team by team, Dave. I mean, my guess is there'll be some teams that don't even have him on their draft board, and there'll be other teams that'll love him, but hope that maybe he drops and we can pick him up a little later. But I think if you're just talking about his on-field play, and he's another guy that I watched last summer from 2022, and of course from this year, I think in terms of refinement as a pass rusher, he's the best guy in this draft. He's got more tools in his toolbox than any of these other pass rushers, and you rarely see that from college pass rushers. Normally, you have to teach them a pass rush arsenal when they get to the league, how to use their hands, how to have a plan. I think he's that guy right now. He actually reminded me of T.J. Watt when Watt came out of Wisconsin. I don't want people to think I'm talking about Watt right now when he's maybe the second or third or top pass rusher in the league. But I remember doing T.J. Watt coming out of Wisconsin. Latu kind of reminds me of him. I think he's a really, really good prospect.
Hey, Greg, a thought came to mind when you said he's got a lot in his toolbox. When we were at Dallas, Jimmy Johnson used to say, let's draft these guys that do things that we don't have to coach. That's what you're describing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Well, coach, there's some things you can coach and there's some things you can't coach. And I think when a guy has a feel for something, that's why the word instinct's often overused, but we all kind of know what it means. And when a guy has that to his game, kind of that innate feel for his position, you can't really coach that.
Speaking of a feel for a position, Greg, you clearly have a feel for all of these draft picks. My goodness, you said you've been watching 130 players on film. Exactly. Round of applause.
Give or take,
I mean, just insane. We appreciate you stopping by and making the time for us here on Big Ten Today.
Oh, thanks, guys. I loved it. Appreciate it.